My husband told his mother in the hospital waiting room while I was in surgery that he had serious doubts about our daughter. He said it in a low voice, the way people say things in waiting rooms, in the register that is meant to be private but is pitched just above the level that would actually be private. He forgot or did not think it mattered that I had been a pediatric audiologist for 8 years and had spent those 8 years conducting newborn hearing screenings and tracking hearing-related delays in children from birth through age 5, the critical window for auditory development. Each screening produces a documented result. Each result goes into the child's medical record. Each record is maintained under regulatory requirements. I understand exactly what a medical record means when produced correctly, and exactly what it fails to mean when it is not. The forensic genetics certification was produced correctly. Dr. Marsh's credentials on the letterhead, his signature on the label, the collection date, the methodology, the confidence level stated in precise statistical terms, developmental delays, and that I had reviewed the cord blood tissue typing report on the day my daughter was born, and had kept a certified copy of the HLA analysis in a fireproof box in my office since the week I brought her home. The fireproof box is a standard metal document box with a keyed latch. I had bought it 3 months before my daughter was born, while reorganizing my office's document storage. The cord blood certification went into it on a Tuesday afternoon, in a manila envelope labeled with the date, the document type, and Dr. Marsh's name. The sealed envelope had been in the back of the box for 14 months when I gave it to Carmen Whitfield. He had said his piece in a hospital waiting room. He had not thought about the chain of people Sybil would carry the information to, had not thought about the social worker sibling who would write down the dates. The hospital waiting room was a public space. What was said there was said publicly. The statute's language did not qualify public by intent or audience size. The preliminary hearing was also public. Both statements had been made in public settings. Both entered the statutory calculation about the social worker sibling who would write the dates down. He had thought the waiting room was private. Waiting rooms are not private. The things that happen in rooms have a way of becoming documentation. The report was sealed before our daughter was 6 days old. He was approximately 2 years too late. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. There is a specific calculation that some people make when a marriage begins to fail. They look for the thing that will do the most damage, the claim that will be hardest to disprove, the allegation that will reorganize the emotional landscape so entirely that everything else becomes secondary. They choose it the way you might choose a tool for maximum effect. What they rarely calculate is that the person they are making the claim about might have thought of it first, not as a weapon, as a professional habit, the habit of someone who handles neonatal medical records every working day and who reviewed her daughter's cord blood workup, not because she suspected anything, but because reviewing records is what she does, and what she found, she had certified and sealed before she left the hospital, because documentation is how she thinks about care. She had been doing this for 8 years, before any of this happened. I am Veda Spry, née Fontaine, and I am 36 years old. I am a pediatric audiologist in Savannah, Georgia, in a city I moved to 6 years ago for this position. The clinic is a pediatric specialty facility organized around the needs of children from birth through adolescence. The audiology suite is at the end of the east corridor that faces the garden, which has afternoon light through the windows and a particular quality at certain hours, a quality of careful relief, of things seen clearly. I arrive before 7 most mornings and review the previous day's results and prepare the equipment. The work requires sustained precision, not the dramatic precision of acute care, but the developmental monitoring precision of someone who notices a small variation in a standard result and knows whether it is within expected range or outside it, and what the difference means for the child's trajectory, and what the appropriate response is. 8 years of this practice built the professional habit that organized everything in this account, and that I have come to know with affection and specificity, its neighborhoods and particular light, the way the heat comes in from the river in August, and the Spanish moss moves in the afternoon air. I have a small apartment near the clinic that I have furnished over 6 years in the particular way of someone who has not made a permanent decision about the place, but has made comfortable decisions about each year as it arrives. The cactus on the windowsill has been there for 4 years and bloomed for the first time last spring, which I took as information about patience rather than as a personal sign. The clinic is a pediatric specialty environment, specialists in multiple disciplines, sharing a facility organized around the needs of children from birth through adolescence. The audiology suite is at the end of the east corridor, which faces the garden that the hospital's volunteer landscaping program maintains. I arrive most mornings before 7, before the first appointments, and I review the previous day's results and prepare the morning's screening equipment. The work requires precision of a specific kind, not the dramatic precision of acute care, but the sustained precision of developmental monitoring, the kind of precision that notices a small variation in a standard result and knows whether the variation is within expected range or outside it, and what the difference means for the child's developmental trajectory, and what the appropriate response is. I have been making these judgments for 8 years. I make them for my daughter with the same instruments at the same benchmarks, with the same professional standards, and the additional attention of a person who has a specific stake in the outcome, and have come to know the way you come to know a place you chose deliberately, with affection and specificity, with the understanding of its particular neighborhoods and particular light, and the way the heat comes in from the river in August and the Spanish moss moves in the afternoon air at a children's hospital where I have worked for 6 years. My work is specific. Newborn hearing screenings, hearing-related developmental tracking, early intervention for children whose auditory processing has fallen outside the standard range. The work requires a precise understanding of neonatal medical records, the panels that are generated at birth, the certifications that accompany them, the chain of custody protocols that make a medical result legally and clinically defensible. I understand these protocols the way I understand the audiological literature, as necessary as knowing the equipment. a hearing screening is not just a pass or fail. It is a set of measurements connected to a chain of custody that begins with the collection of the sample and ends with the signed report in the medical record. When a result is contested, the chain of custody is what makes the result defensible. I learned this in the first year of my practice, and I have never unlearned it. Documentation is care. A well-documented result protects the child. Not as specialized knowledge, but as professional vocabulary, as necessary as the equipment I use. When my daughter was born, I reviewed her cord blood workup as a matter of habit. The cord blood workup includes a range of panels, routine tests, the results of which are entered into the newborn's medical record within the first days of life. I reviewed the panels the way I review any clinical record, carefully, specifically, noting the elements that were within expected ranges and the elements that merited tracking. One element I noted was the HLA tissue typing report, the human leukocyte antigen analysis generated from the cord blood collection. HLA typing is standard in many clinical contexts: transplant medicine, immunological assessment, forensic genetics. In the context of the cord blood workup, it generates data that has specific uses in certain genetic assessments. I knew this. I also knew something else, which was that my marriage had been deteriorating for the better part of a year, and that Lorne Spry was a commercial litigation attorney who selected his strategies carefully, and that a certain kind of strategy was available to him if he decided to use it. I requested a forensic genetics certification from Dr. Fenwick Marsh, the neonatologist who had overseen the cord blood collection. Dr. Marsh is 51 years old, experienced and thorough. I explained to him, in professional terms, what I needed and why I needed it. Dr. Marsh asked whether I had consulted a family law attorney. I said yes. He asked whether I understood forensic chain of custody requirements. I said yes. I worked in a clinical environment daily and was familiar with chain of custody protocols. He asked whether I was certain I wanted the certification on the record. I said I want it in a box in my office, available if I need it. He said, I understand. He reviewed the HLA data, ran the compatibility analysis, prepared the certification, sealed the envelope, signed the label. He said, I hope you don't need it. I said, I hope so too. I took the envelope, drove to my office, put it in the fireproof box, and went back to work. He reviewed the HLA data, cross-referenced it with Lorne's blood type from the premarital medical screening that was on file in our shared medical records, and completed the forensic certification. The HLA compatibility analysis, in combination with the blood type data, established biological paternity at a statistical confidence level the report described as indistinguishable from direct DNA testing. He sealed the envelope and signed the certification label. It was the 6th day of my daughter's life. I placed the sealed envelope in the fireproof box in my office, where it remained for the following 2 years, undisturbed, while my marriage continued its deterioration and my daughter learned to walk and say 8 words and respond to her name with the particular delight of a small person who has figured out that her name means her. The warning signs had accumulated over a specific period. The first was a question Lorne had asked in a tense conversation in February about when their daughter had become real to him. He said, I don't know when she became real to me. He said it without context. It did not connect to anything we had been discussing. It arrived as though he had been carrying it and had put it down. I had not said anything. I had filed the question in the same place I file clinical observations that are outside the expected range, in the category requiring follow-up, but not yet requiring action. The second was a conversation about custody arrangements that Lorne raised in hypothetical terms, months before any separation was formalized. He said, "What would you want if we ever went through something like that?" I said, "I would want to be the primary parent." He said, "That's what I thought." He said it in a way that did not close the conversation, said it in a way that kept it open, as though filing my answer for later reference. I said nothing else. He moved on. I did not forget what he had said or the way he had said it. The third was Sybil's call, which had arrived under the pretense of checking in after my surgery, and had asked in the middle of the call a question about family history that did not connect to anything in the conversation's prior context. She had asked it as though she were making conversation. She was not making conversation. She was collecting information. I had answered the question with the minimum accurate response and had said goodbye and had called Tess and described the call, and Tess had written it down in the green section of her record. Have you ever prepared for something you hoped would never happen? The specific feeling of that preparation, not fearfulness, not anxiety, but the particular calm of someone who has identified a possible problem and is addressing it in the competent way their training has given them. I had been doing this kind of preparation my entire professional life. I prepared for the diagnostic edge case, the result that could go one of two ways. The assessment, where the standard protocol needed supplementation. I prepared the same way for this. I did not tell Lorne. I did not tell anyone except my sister Tess, who is a social worker and who had been observing my marriage with the watchful attention of a younger sibling who has been taking notes. Tess Fontaine is 40 years old, and she is, in my assessment, the most observant person in my family, in a family where observation runs as a professional habit across at least 3 of us. Her 62-page written record was organized chronologically with dates, with the names of parties present, with a clear distinction between direct observation and reported information. Color-coded tabs. Blue for behavioral patterns, observed directly, green for statements made to her, yellow for information received from third parties, and corroborated. Carmen described it as the most useful supporting documentation she had received in a family law case in the preceding 2 years, which is saying something in a family that tends toward precision. She has been a social worker in Savannah for 12 years, and her work requires her to observe behavioral patterns, document what she observes, and be accurate about the difference between what is said and what is meant. She had been watching Lorne for 3 years. She had been writing things down for 2. She provided her written records to my family law attorney as a supporting document in the custody proceeding. The record was 62 pages long. My attorney described it with the understatement of someone who has seen a lot of supporting documentation as comprehensive. The marriage deteriorated over specific things. Lorne's extended absences, he traveled for work, which was a fact we had managed in the marriage's earlier years, and which had become, in its later years, less a managed fact and more a defining one: his financial management, which had been a background friction from early in the marriage, and which had become a foreground problem when I began paying closer attention to the household accounts and found patterns that required direct conversation and then required professional assistance to address. And a pattern of behavior that Tess had named before I had named it myself, a pattern of incremental erosion that is specific to certain kinds of relationships and that takes time to become fully visible, named it in the specific way that someone names a thing when they have been watching it carefully long enough to be confident, not as a diagnosis, as a description. She described what she had seen over 2 years of watching closely, the way certain conversations had a pattern of being redirected when they reached a specific point, the way information moved in one direction in the marriage but not both, the way my needs entered the marriage's framework as negotiable variables while other things were fixed. She described it over coffee on a Saturday morning. She used language that was specific and accurate, and that I recognized from my own observation without having fully assembled it into a description. The naming helped, specific to certain kinds of relationships, and that takes time to become fully visible, and that, once visible, cannot be unseen. The marriage had been deteriorating for the better part of 2 years before the custody proceeding was filed. Deteriorating is the right word. Not ending dramatically, not marked by a single rupture, but diminishing steadily through a sequence of specific failures that I documented in my own way as they accumulated. Lorne's extended absences had been a structural feature of our life from the beginning. His commercial litigation practice required travel, and the travel had been a managed fact in the marriage's earlier years. It became less manageable as the marriage aged, not because the travel increased, but because the gap it created in the household's functioning became less tolerated by me and less attended to by him. The financial management problems developed separately and were addressed directly. I hired a financial advisor who reviewed our accounts and produced a picture that required conversation and correction. The correction took months. The conversation was the kind of conversation that, once had, cannot be unhad. And the pattern that Tess had named, the incremental erosion, the specific failures of reciprocity, was the third thread, the one I had the most trouble naming because it was the most diffuse and the most intimate. When Tess named it over coffee, in the clear language she had been waiting to use, I recognized every element without being surprised by any of them. I had simply not assembled them into a sentence yet. The sentence was, "This marriage is ending." Once assembled, the sentence required action. The action began with a call to Estella Carver, who was not, at that point, Carmen Whitfield. Estella practices in New Mexico, and I am in Georgia. And Carmen Whitfield is the family law attorney in Savannah, who Estella referred me to when I relocated the year after my daughter was born. Carmen is 44 years old, precise and efficient, and she has the specific quality of family law attorneys who have practiced long enough to have seen every kind of case, an ability to distinguish between what is legally relevant and what is emotionally important, and to handle both without confusing them. She handled both without confusing them. Lorne chose his strategy carefully. He is a commercial litigation attorney. He understands how claims work, how they are framed, and what effect they have in the early stages of a proceeding before the evidence is fully developed. He told his mother in the hospital waiting room, Sybil Spry, 64 years old, a woman who considers herself discreet and is not, received the information and carried it within 3 weeks to Lauren's sister and to 2 family friends, both of whom knew me. The claim made its way to me through a mutual friend who called to say she had heard something concerning at a dinner and thought I should know. She described what Sybil had said accurately. I recognized Lauren's hospital waiting room statement in the account. I thanked her. I said, I know. She said, Are you okay? I said, Yes. I said, Keep the date you heard it. And who told you? She asked why. I said, It might matter. It mattered. When Tessa's record was assembled, this account was in the green section, corroborated reported information, with date and social context, which contributed to the sanctions calculation. Who called to say she had heard something concerning and wanted me to know, in case I did not know? I thanked her. I knew exactly what she had heard. Have you ever heard something about yourself and felt, not shock, but a specific kind of recognition, the recognition of something you saw coming, organized against, and are now watching arrive? That is what I felt when I heard what Sybil had said. Not anger, not fear. The clean, specific recognition of a prepared person encountering the thing they prepared for. The fireproof box was in my office. The sealed envelope was in the fireproof box. The forensic certification was on Dr. Marsh's letterhead, with his signature on the certification label. The date was the 6th day of my daughter's life. The claim was 2 years old. I was ready. The custody proceeding was filed in Chatham County Family Court. The filing included the petition, the supporting documentation, and the parenting plan Carmen had drafted in consultation with me. I had specific positions on the plan: primary residence, structured parenting schedule, provisions for medical and educational decision-making. The plan reflected these positions accurately. Lauren's attorney introduced, in a preliminary hearing, the suggestion that Lauren had questions about the child's parentage. He introduced it as a motion, a specific procedural instrument that requires the court to address it, that is entered into the transcript, that becomes part of the public record of the proceeding. He said it was a matter that deserved transparency in the interests of the child. He said it in the measured language of someone who believes they have a strong procedural position and is comfortable making the claim in a formal setting. The hearing transcript would show date, judge, attorney, motion, language of the motion, time of the motion. All of that was recorded. All of that was, from the moment it was spoken, the public record that the statute's language referred to when it used the word public that should be resolved before custody arrangements were finalized. He framed it in the language of transparency, of the child's interests, of the importance of clarity in proceedings involving minor children. The language was selected to sound reasonable. It was also, technically, a public proceeding, a preliminary hearing in family court on the record, with the court reporter typing and the gallery present, including Sybil Spry, who was seated in the second row and who did not look at me when I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Before the preliminary hearing, Tess and I had a conversation about what the hearing would be. She came to my apartment the night before, brought food and stayed until 10, and we sat at the kitchen table, and talked about the case in the specific way that two people who both work in professional environments involving documentation and evidence talk about a case, not emotionally primarily, but practically. What did we have? What was it worth? What would the other side argue? What was the response? We had the sealed envelope and Dr. Marsh's certification and Tess's 62 pages and the mutual friends account and the Georgia statute. The other side had Lorne's assertion, which was exactly what an assertion is without evidence, a position, not a fact. Tess said, he's going to say it in a public proceeding. I said, I know. She said, do you know how that feels? I said, I know how it's going to end. She said, that's not the same thing. I said, I know, it's not the same thing. She stayed until 10 and then went home. I went to bed and slept 6 hours, which is enough, and got up and got dressed and drove to the courthouse and sat at the plaintiff's table and waited. My family law attorney is named Carmen Whitfield. She has practiced family law in Savannah for 17 years and has the particular combination of directness and patience that long-term family law practice produces. Directness because the facts either support a position or they don't, and patience because these things take the time they take. When I placed the sealed envelope on her conference table 6 months before the preliminary hearing, she read the certification label and went quiet. The meeting was in Carmen's office in the late afternoon, in the quiet that a law office has when the business hours have completed and the attorneys are still working. I had brought the fireproof box from my car. I'd set it on Carmen's desk, opened it, removed the sealed envelope, placed it in front of her. She read the certification label. She asked the questions I have described. She said, we don't go to the standard DNA process. We use this. In the 6 months between that meeting and the preliminary hearing, we met 4 more times to review the parenting plan, to address the discovery requests, to review the preliminary hearing procedure, to organize the documentation sequence. When the envelope went on the documentation table at the preliminary hearing, it was where Carmen had planned for it to be, was quiet for a moment, and then said, "This is from the 6th day of her life." I said, "Yes." She said, "Before any of this started." I said, "Before he had said anything in any public setting." She said, "Good. We don't go to the standard DNA process. We use this." I said, "That was my thought." The sealed forensic genetics envelope arrived at the hearing in Carmen's document portfolio. Carmen placed it flat on the documentation table, the manila envelope, sealed, certification label signed by Dr. Marsh. Beside it, the chain of custody documentation, the methodology page, and a single page from the shared medical file showing Lorne's blood type from the premarital screening. The blood type page was dated before the wedding. The envelope was dated day 6 of my daughter's life. Carmen placed the confidence level sheet last. She said nothing. After Lorne's attorney made a statement about the parentage questions, Carmen produced the envelope and the accompanying documentation, Dr. Marsh's forensic certification, the HLA compatibility analysis, Lorne's blood type from the premarital medical screening, and the cross-reference methodology. She placed them on the court's documentation table without comment, because the documents did not require comment. She then noted, for the record, the date on the certification, day 6 of the child's life. She noted the date of Lorne's statement in the current preliminary hearing. She noted the date that Sybil Spry's report had reached 4 people in the family social network, corroborated by Tess's written record. Then she stated clearly and once the applicable provision of Georgia Code, Section 19-7-46. A parent who publicly contests parentage without reasonable basis, where paternity is subsequently confirmed by genetic evidence, is subject to sanctions including attorney's fees and adverse credibility findings in subsequent custody proceedings. Lorne's attorney asked for a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes, Carmen and I reviewed the documents already in evidence. We did not discuss the case's likely outcome. The documentation had resolved it. We discussed my daughter's most recent developmental assessment. We talked about her 14 words. When the recess ended, the withdrawal was delivered. Lorne's attorney returned first. He conferred with Lorne for approximately 2 minutes in the hallway outside the courtroom. Visible through the glass panel in the door, 2 figures in the hallway, one speaking and one listening with the specific posture of someone receiving information that confirms what he was already told was possible. Then they entered. The attorney said, "In the interest of expediting the custody matter, my client is withdrawing the parentage question at this time." He said it in the measured formal register of someone abandoning a position they are not going to defend. The withdrawal was entered in the transcript. Carmen noted the dates for the sanctions record. The sanctions hearing was scheduled. The fee contribution agreement was reached, $18,400. The custody arrangement was scheduled for the next hearing. The custody arrangement was finalized. Lorne signed. He walked out. Tess was in the gallery. She watched Lorne walk out, then she looked at me. She gave a single small nod. I nodded back. That was all that needed to happen. Nothing useful happened in those 40 minutes for Lorne. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Carmen and reviewed the exhibits while the recess clock ran. Tess was in the gallery. She looked at me once, across the room, and I looked back, and we did not exchange any expression in particular. There was nothing to express. The envelope was in evidence. The certification was in evidence. The date was the date. The recess ended. Lorne's attorney returned and withdrew the parentage question in the interest of expediting the custody matter. He said this in the specific formal register of someone abandoning a position they are not going to defend, because defending it would require them to argue against a sealed forensic certification from a neonatologist dated on the 6th day of the child's life. And no one was going to do that. The withdrawal was recorded in the transcript. Carmen then noted, for the record, that the dates she had previously entered, the hospital waiting room statement, the social network repetitions, the preliminary hearing statement, the certification date, had been entered to support a sanctions request under Section 19-7-46. The judge scheduled a separate hearing on the sanctions question. The hearing was structured as a brief argument on the applicable statute and the documented dates. Carmen presented the timeline, the hospital waiting room statement, the social network repetitions documented by Tess, the preliminary hearing motion. She presented the forensic certification date 6 days after birth, 2 years before any public statement. She presented the statutory language and the fee calculation. $18,400. Lauren's attorney offered $12,000 in conference afterward. Carmen said, "The computable fees are $18,400. Lauren's attorney called back within 48 hours. The settlement was $18,400. Payment was made within 14 days. The separate hearing was resolved when Lauren's attorney agreed to a fee contribution of $18,400, which represented the attorney's fees computable from the date of the earliest documented public contest. Payment was made. The proceeding was complete in the technical sense. All motions resolved, all questions answered. The record told a complete story. A man who made a public claim about his daughter's parentage without basis, answered by documentation that predated the claim by 2 years, which represented the attorney's fees computable from the date Lauren's original hospital waiting room statement was made and corroborated. The custody arrangement was finalized at the subsequent hearing. Primary residence with me. Structured parenting time for Lauren by a specific schedule drafted by Carmen with the precision that prevents conflict. Lauren's attorney made 2 modifications, both reasonable, both accepted. The schedule was signed. Lauren signed and left without speaking. Primary residence with me. Structured parenting time for Lauren by a specific schedule with specific provisions. Sybil was not present for the final hearing. I did not request her exclusion, she simply was not there. Lauren signed the custody agreement and left the courtroom without making eye contact with me or with Carmen. He walked past Tess in the gallery without acknowledging her. He went through the door and the door closed. Tess looked at me and gave a single small nod. I nodded back. That was all that needed to happen. After the case closed, Dr. Marsh sent a brief note to my office. It was handwritten, on personal stationery, to my clinic address. The note said, "Veda, I heard from Tess. I'm glad you kept it. F. Marsh." I read it once and put it in the fireproof box with the custody agreement, my daughter's pediatric records, and the hearing screening results. I have checked her hearing at every benchmark with the same professional care and the same maternal attention, because in my case, those are the same attention. She is 2 years old. Her hearing is excellent. He had heard from Tess, who had updated him on the outcome. The note said, "I'm glad you kept it." He meant the sealed envelope. He meant the decision to request the forensic certification on day 6, when I had no particular reason to need it, except professional instinct and the particular clarity of someone who knows how documentation works, and who understood, on the 6th day of her daughter's life, that some documents should be made before they are needed, rather than after. I kept it. It did its work. The fireproof box is in my office. The sealed envelope is back in it, behind the custody agreement and the pediatric records and the immunization schedule and the hearing screening results. My daughter's hearing is excellent, within the expected range at every benchmark, which I check with professional care and maternal attention because they are the same attention and I cannot separate them. She is 2 years old now. She has 14 words that she uses with intention and precision, and she has recently developed an interest in the drawer under the examination table that contains the audiological equipment, which she tries to open every time she visits the clinic, which is often because she comes with me sometimes when Tess cannot watch her, and she is comfortable in the clinic, and the clinic is comfortable with her. Sybil called Tess after the case closed to say she hadn't meant for it to go that far. Tess told me at Sunday dinner. She described what Sybil had said and what she had replied, asking what Sybil thought FAR meant. The FAR in question was a Chatham County Family Court custody proceeding with a 40-minute recess and an $18,400 sanction. That is a specific distance. Sybil had set it in motion by carrying one statement to 4 people, and Tess had documented what she heard, and Carmen had organized the record. Tess told me this. I asked what Tess had said in response. Tess said, I asked her what she thought FAR meant. I said, what did she say? Tess said she didn't answer. I thought about Sybil in the second row of the gallery, with her small planner, making a note at some point during the preliminary hearing. I thought about what she might have written in the note. I thought about her carrying Lorne's hospital waiting room statement to 4 people carefully, she would have thought, with discretion, which she believed she was being discreet about. The discretion had been recorded by Tess. The recording had been provided to Carmen. The dates had been entered into evidence. Everything that had been said in waiting rooms and over family dinners and in private conversations had been documented by someone and had arrived in the transcript. The things that are said quietly in small rooms have a way of ending up in the public record. Your grandmother may have told you to document everything. Your clinical supervisor may have told you that chain of custody documentation is not optional. However you came to it, the document is the answer to the specific question of whether something happened on a specific date with a specific result, certified by a specific practitioner, filed in a specific box. The box is in my office. The date is on the label. The label has been there since the 6th day of her life. Your mother may have told you to keep copies. Or no one told you and you learned it on your own, the way I learned it. By training, by professional habit, by the accumulated understanding of 8 years of watching what happens when a record exists and what happens when it does not. The record existed. It was sealed on the 6th day of my daughter's life. It was dated. It was certified. It waited in the fireproof box in my office for 2 years, through every development in the marriage and every phase of the proceeding, until Carmen placed it on the documentation table in Chatham County Family Court. And Lorne's attorney asked for a 40-minute recess that produced nothing useful. There are aspects of this account that I have not yet described in full, and they deserve description, because they are the parts that make the account complete rather than merely legible. The first is what happened in the year between the court-ordered DNA discussion that Carmen raised and the preliminary hearing where the sealed envelope was produced. The year had a shape. It was not dramatic in the way that stories about difficult proceedings are sometimes made to sound dramatic. It did not involve confrontations or threats or anything that would be narrated with heightened language in a true crime context. It involved going to work, conducting screenings, attending developmental appointments with my daughter, filing the legal documents that Carmen needed filed, answering the discovery requests that Lorne's attorney sent, and maintaining the administrative structure of a life that was being reorganized around a new single-parent framework. I had reorganized the apartment to make the logistics work. the daycare pickup schedule, the backup care arrangements for the days I had early cases, the meal preparation system that kept us fed through the weeks when the legal administration took time I would otherwise have spent cooking. I have always been good at logistics. Logistics are a form of preparation. The year was a logistics problem that I managed. The second is what Tess and I talked about during that year. Tess called twice a week, Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings, in the specific rhythm of someone who has set a schedule for herself and is maintaining it. She did not always have something new to report. She called to be present. I called to be present back. We talked about our work, about our family, about the cases she was managing that were difficult, and the ones that were resolving. We talked about our grandmother and the things she had taught us. We talked about our father and the things he had not. We talked about my daughter, who was in the process of acquiring language and preference, and the specific little character that was emerging week by week in the ways she chose to engage with the world. Tess came to visit twice in that year. She slept on the couch and made coffee in the mornings and helped with the logistics and watched my daughter with the specific attention of a person who understands early childhood development professionally and who is also an aunt. She said on one of those visits, "She's going to be like you." I said, "How?" She said, "Observant and prepared." I said, "I hope so." Tess said, "She already is." She pointed at the fireproof box in my office, and Tess laughed, and I laughed, and the year continued. The third is what the sanctions meant in the larger context of the custody proceeding. The ATIMA $400 fee contribution was not the point. The fee contribution was the monetary expression of a statutory finding, the finding that Lorne had made a public claim about his daughter's parentage without reasonable basis, and that the claim had been demonstrably wrong, and that this wrongness had a legal consequence that the statute had specified in advance. The consequence was not designed as punishment. It was designed as calibration, as the acknowledgement that making public claims about parentage has stakes, and that those stakes should be real enough to prevent people from using parentage claims strategically as a tool in custody proceedings without basis. The calibration had worked in the expected direction. The fee contribution was the calibration made concrete. I did not think of it as a victory. I thought of it as the correct resolution of a situation where the documentation was in order and the statute was clear and the outcome was the outcome. The fourth is what Dr. Fenwick Marsh said to me in the brief exchange we had in the hospital corridor approximately 2 months after the preliminary hearing. I was there for a clinical consultation, a complex neonatal hearing case that required a specialist opinion. He happened to be in the corridor. He stopped. He said, "I heard the case resolved well." I said, "It did." He said, "I thought it would." He paused. He said, "You know, when you came to see me that day, I understood immediately what you were doing, and I respected it." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You were making the document before you needed it, not for the proceeding, for the record." I said, "Yes." He said, "That's good clinical practice." I said, "It's the only kind I know." He said, "I know. That's why I signed it without hesitation." He went back to wherever he was going. I went to my consultation. The corridor had the afternoon light at that angle that makes it appear in careful relief. I want to close with something specific. When I went to see Dr. Marsh on the 6th day of my daughter's life and asked for the forensic certification, I did not know for certain that Lorne would raise the parentage question. I thought he might. I had reasons: the behavioral evidence, the oblique questions, the comment about when the baby became real to him. But I did not know. It was possible I was wrong about what was coming. It was possible the certification would sit in the fireproof box for years and never be needed. I made the certification anyway. The possibility was real, and real possibilities deserve preparation. The cost of preparing for a possibility that does not materialize is much lower than the cost of failing to prepare for one that does. The certification cost one afternoon and Dr. Marsh's time. If it had never been needed, it would have remained in the box, filed, dated, organized, available. The cost of not having it if needed would have been a court-ordered DNA test, months of additional proceeding, and the absence of the statutory sanctions that accrued from the specific date of the specific sealed document. The asymmetry was clear. I made the certification. This is the habit, not the dramatic habit of someone who anticipated every danger with heroic foresight, but the ordinary habit of a clinical practitioner who understands that documentation is care, and that care is perspective, and that the document you make before you need it is the document that does its work correctly when you do. The document did its work on a Tuesday morning in Chatham County Family Court. In 40 minutes of recess that produced nothing useful for Lorne. In the single nod Tess gave me from the gallery when the withdrawal was delivered. The document had been doing its work since day 6. It simply needed to be placed on the table. Dear listeners, if you have ever kept something carefully, not knowing exactly when you would need it, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me whether the preparation was something you made consciously, knowing the storm was coming, or whether you simply kept things organized as a habit and found, when the storm arrived, that the habit had prepared you. Tell me whether the person you trusted to be there with you, the sibling, the colleague, the attorney, was there when it mattered. Tell me whether the document was in the box when you needed it, or whether you had to assemble it from memory, which is always harder and always less reliable, and always the worst position to be in when the proceeding begins. Tell me whether the document was where you expected it to be. Tell me whether the date on the document was the thing that mattered most, as dates so frequently are, because in medical records and legal instruments alike, the date is the element that establishes sequence, and sequence is what the statute reads when it is deciding what happened before what and what the order of events means for the outcome. The order of events was clear. Day 6, 2 years, the claim, the recess, the withdrawal, the sanctions, the custody agreement, the specific nod in the gallery. Because in medical records, the sequence was clear. The document was made on day 6. Day 6 was the beginning of everything that followed: care first, resolution after, the record intact throughout. And legal instruments alike, the date is the element that establishes sequence, and sequence is what the statute reads when it is deciding what happened before what and what the order of events means for the outcome. Tell me whether it was there when you needed it. Tell me whether someone told you to keep it, or whether you simply knew. Tell me which city you are listening from. Savannah is warm and the clinic is open, and the East Corridor has afternoon light through the garden-facing windows. My daughter came to the clinic with me yesterday. She pointed at the audiological equipment and said, "This." I told her what it was. She pointed at the fireproof box in my office. She said, "This." I said, "That's where I keep the important documents." She filed the word. She will use it again. She already uses 14 words with precision. The precision is hers. The box is mine. Both of us are, in this morning's light, exactly where we are supposed to be. And my daughter tried to open the drawer under the examination table again this morning. And I let her, because the equipment inside it is for her future, and it belongs to her as much as it belongs to me. The clinic is open this morning. The East Corridor has its afternoon light, which will arrive later, at the angle that makes things appear in careful relief. The fireproof box is on its shelf. The date on the label has not changed. Day 6. The date is a permanent fact. Permanent facts do not require maintenance. The case is resolved. The custody agreement is signed. The sanctions are paid. The record is complete. The document is in the box. And the box is in my office. And my office is at the end of the East Corridor. And my daughter is 2 years old and uses 14 words with precision and intention, and pointed at the box yesterday. And I told her what it was for. She will remember. She is, as Dr. Marsh said, someone interesting. Thank you for listening. Stay with Lena. We have more of these.